Hi, everyone. My name is Elaine Mathias, and I am the co-founder of the Jobs to Be Done Toolkit. I'm here today with my illustrious co-founder, Jim Callback.
Hey, Elaine. Hello, everybody. Jim Callback, author of the Jobs to Be Done playbook and co-founder of the Jobs to Be Done toolkit.
Yes. Yes. Cheers. How's your day going so far, Jim?
It's going pretty good, actually. My schedule was packed, but then I had a couple of cancellations. So, yeah, I had these little mental like free periods, and it's also good because then your calendar's blocked because of the person who canceled. So I just leave it blocked. I don't take it off my calendar. So
That's awesome.
tip for you guys: if somebody cancels, leave it on your calendar.
Mm-hmm. Nice, nice. Yeah, I was bouncing from meeting to meeting as well, but fortunately, they were just ones where I had to be informed, so I wasn't too embarrassed to jump off a little bit early.
There you go.
I'm going to start the session today with a couple of toolkits, so updates. So thank you everybody for joining. If you're not familiar with the Jobs to Be Done toolkit, it's a project that Jim and I launched last summer. So just kind of trying to create a place where you can learn everything about jobs to be done and use it inside of your organization. We are regularly publishing updates to the products that we have there. Our big product is the Jobs to Be Done Essentials course. And like I said, we're always adding information. So we published a new module inside the Essentials course a couple of weeks ago at this point, I think. But then we also made that mini module available to the public. So it's called Scoping Your Jobs to Be Done Strategy. Jim, if you would scroll down just a little bit. Cool. So the Essentials course is, I believe, $379, but if you just want the mini module, that's $99. You can find information about it at jtbdtoolkit.com. We have also been running monthly workshops. Those are going really well. The courses are really kind of for learning, wrapping your head around what jobs to be done is. The workshops are designed to put it all into practice. So we take all that information and then we put you in a room of other people who are working on similar problems, and Jim leads you through a bunch of very involved activities to kind of help you understand like what happens when you're actually putting this information into context. Our January workshop is integrating jobs to be done into your workflow. So we're going to talk about, if you're already using Agile, if you're already using contextual interviews, if you're already using design thinking, we'll talk about how jobs to be done can fit into that without disrupting your existing practices. And we also released a new free resource called The Brief Guide to Jobs Interviews. This is a little ebook that actually came out of our December workshop, and it is available on the resource library page of the jobstobeDoneToolkit.com. So resource library, just up there in the navigation. And then I'll also send a link to the download page in the follow-up email to this webinar. I think that's about everything.
Oh, good. And just a quick note, we actually don't have a room that we stick you in. It's a virtual room. It's a Zoom room. It kind of sounded like we were locking people up there for a second, Elaine, but we don't lock you up.
No.
You come into it. It's an open Zoom room. We have a lot of fun.
Yes.
And folks who are on the line and have taken a course with me, they know that it's a lot of fun. And 3 or 4 hours can go by really, really quickly because it's super engaging as well too. Yeah. All right. So we always like to start out with a question before I get into the Q&A section of the webinar, which is pretty much most of the webinar. We're done with the program part of the webinar. We're going to move into questions really quickly. But I wanted to throw out there, and if you can respond in the Zoom chat, I'd love to hear your thoughts on key challenges that you have introducing jobs to be done in your organization or to your clients. I realize that not everybody works inside of an organization, and sometimes they're working with clients. So you're trying to introduce jobs to be done to your client as well too. And to some degree, Elaine, the workshop that you just mentioned in the next one coming up at the end of January, we're going to talk a little bit about this. We're going to talk about how you can work jobs to be done in an existing workflow, how it relates to design thinking and agile and things like that. Not so much about convincing stakeholders, although we'll look at that a little bit. But this is a topic that we're interested in, and we'd like to hear from you guys here in the chat. What are some of your key challenges that you have when you're introducing jobs to be done in your organization or to your clients? And if you could just throw in a couple of ideas there, that would be great. And while you're doing that as well, I just wanted to point out a new blog post that I have. That's not right. Yeah, here it is over here. I'll put this in the chat as well too, so you can hear. So you can take a look at that link that I just put in there. Wojtek says teaching clients to extract jobs without making them too vague or too reliant on technology, right? Yeah, jobs to be done is a language, right? And just like learning any other language, it takes a little bit of practice. If we were to come on this webinar and say, hey, we're going to teach you how to speak Spanish, you're not going to do it in one session, right? You have to kind of get into the rhythm of what is a job, what is an outcome, how am I supposed to formulate those? And it does take a little bit of practice to get the right level of granularity, so it's not too vague. And then the interesting one is that jobs to be done consciously expunges technology from your language. And I can't tell you how many times I've come across people who say, yeah, I get jobs to be done. And then in theory, right? And then you get to the practical part, and the first thing they do is they write technology in their statement. It's like, no. Okay, you got the idea, but can you actually do it? So I think there is a gap between understanding that you can't write technology and then actually doing that and what that means. And you can't say the word email and a whole bunch of other words. You can't say the word agile because agile is a method, right? And things like that. So getting into that practice is something that we take on in the sessions that we do too, Elaine. A lot of the workshops, we look at some of those practical aspects of jobs to be done, right?
Yeah, we do. I mean, I think, what we've discovered is that it's one thing to kind of learn about the concepts, but when you're actually inside of the organization and you're working with so many different personalities or the nuances of your industry, there's so many different things to take into account. And so it's kind of nice to have a safe play space to work through some of those problems and think about the application.
And Joshua says getting product founders to think in terms of job performers rather than being in love with their solution, right? And that, for me, that's the huge benefit of jobs to be done is that flip of perspective, right? You don't see people as consumers of your product, right? And I get it that founders are in love with their product and that's all they want to talk about. So it's even more exaggerated kind of relationship. It's about looking at things from a different relationship, right? And that can be temporary too. I often talk about the out of body experience. You don't have to throw away your brand and your customer journey map and stuff. You want all of that stuff. You want a great consumption journey, right? So don't throw that away. But you also want to step out of your own skin and look at things from a different angle, and then kind of go back and forth. So those are good challenges too. Synthesizing jobs is hard, right? And then yeah, I mean that goes back to the extraction and the language and the actual doing of jobs to be done, Paul. Yeah, and then the workshops and just getting stakeholders involved, right, is one. And I put that link in there, and I see Lane did that. Oh, was my link not working? Oh no, that's the jobs interview, right? So there's two links in the chat right now. One to the new blog post that I wrote around some things that I've used or heard other people using to help evangelize and advocate for jobs to be done. And then the other one is the link to the PDF, Elaine, right? That's the download.
Yeah, and I think sometimes the platform that we use, it has a little bit of trouble with the HTTPS portion of URL. So I'm having trouble figuring out which one is working and which one isn't. So stay tuned. But either way, we will make sure that in the email that's coming out right after this webinar, that there is a functional link for you to get to the download.
Yeah. But I know with some stakeholders, there's not another method syndrome, right? We got to take even more time now to do this new thing, and that's why I like to think about more covert ways of bringing in jobs to be done into your organization and add it to a project that's already going on, right? And you might not even call it jobs to be done, right? So you give the illusion that it's not an extra lift, and those are some tips I talk about in that article as well too. Doing it based on real customer research, not the team's assumptions, right? We just did, the workshop that we did in December, Elaine, was on research, and Jen was there as well too. Hi, Jen. Mm-hmm. Thanks for coming. Yeah, it was all focused on real customer research. It looks like Jen wants to speak. Can we unmute her real quick?
Yes, we can. One second, Jen.
Jen Blatz, head of UX Research and Strategy. That's the name of your group, right, Jen?
Right. Yeah. No, I was just waving. I wasn't okay. Like kind of a hand wave kind of to everybody.
Nice to hear your voice. Hello.
Hi.
How are you doing? And you're at Fidelity, right? Still, you work
correct.
At Fidelity,
yes.
Right? lead researcher, head researcher, something like that at Fidelity. But your group is awesome. I love what you do over at UXRS.
Thank you.
Yes.
And hey, everyone, since Jen is pointing out that there are some tools down in the bottom toolbar, like raise hand, there's also a Q&A button if you want to start adding questions to the queue. I see Jonathan and Fritz have already done that. Go ahead and hop in there. That'll probably be the easiest place for us to walk through everything.
Right.
All right. Cool. Really good challenges in here. I'm really enjoying kind of reading.
Yeah. No, this is really good to hear from you, because you know, these are things that I try to talk about in these webinars, in the blog posts that I do, a little bit in the book, not so much in the book, actually. That's why I want to pull this topic out, because I know that a lot of people have this challenge, and it seems to me, Elaine, just from all these answers coming in, that this is a common challenge that people have, is just kind of introducing jobs to be done. You get and you believe in the value of having that new perspective, but then you have the practical hurdle of, how do I bring that into my project team or to a new client?
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah.
It's you know, it's hard to get everybody in an organization sort of moving in the right direction.
Right. And again, one of the strategies that I've used in the past is to just do it, add it to an existing project already. So if you have a qualitative research project already, just shape the interview guide so that you're getting to a job map. And in the deliverables, you know, you might still do all of the deliverables that you had, but you also end up with a job map is one of the deliverables that come out. Right. So that it doesn't look like, oh, you got to fund and take time for a whole separate project called Jobs to be Done. It's just part of what you're already doing. Right. Or adding job stories to agile sprints and things like that. And doing it one step at a time as well, too. You don't have to stop and reinvent your whole business from beginning to end, only using Jobs to be Done. That you can bring things in and out as needed and get people used to the language and the formats as well, too. All right. So I think I'm going to move on then, Elaine. Thanks for all those challenges, everybody. That's great to think about. And please check out this article. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I'm very open to feedback, any gaps, anything that might be missing, or anything that's wrong as well, too. Feel free to call bullshit on me. I wish people would call bullshit on me more than that. You know, sometimes I say something that's a half-baked idea in my mind, and people take it like it's reality. It's like, no, call bullshit on things. You should. That's a word of warning. You should call bullshit on things more often. Actually, just because it's printed in a book doesn't mean it's necessarily true, right?
Yes, but Jim, you're so friendly.
Yeah. And?
Is there maybe a less aggressive term? I think New Yorkers maybe would be open to calling bullshit, but how about a counterpoint?
There you go. Oh, I see. Just by saying bullshit. Well, I think Wojtek liked it.
Yeah, did he?
Bullshit detector on. Okay. What's a more friendlier term then? A less New Yorky term? How about challenge me, please?
Yeah, there you go.
No, but seriously, it helps. And, you know, the sessions like this also help. Like I learn a ton from your questions and from doing these sessions. That's why we want to do it, because we want to shape the toolkit and our live workshops as well too. We want to shape them towards the questions that people actually have, right? And we want things to be as relevant as possible. So by calling BS or being skeptical, Paul, that helps us keep things relevant. It helps me keep things relevant as well too.
Yeah.
And you know, when I wrote the Jobs to be Done playbook, I had been giving a workshop for about 4 or 5 years before that on Jobs to be Done. And what that helped me do was kind of practice in real time how I was going to explain Jobs to be Done, but then also hear all of the pushback and the BS that people called on me. Right. And then rework that back into the next workshop. And I did that for about 4 or 5 years before I sat down and wrote the book. So it's good to be skeptical sometimes.
Yes.
All right.
And a lot of times out of these conversations that we're having, you know, we're kind of lucky because we get to see patterns about the questions that people are asking and different challenges that people are facing. And so that's one of the things that we hope to do with the toolkit, is kind of help aggregate a lot of those questions and provide resources to help answer questions that we're seeing come up very commonly. Totally.
And we're going to go back and look at all those points too. I'm going to go back and cluster all the points that you guys made when you answered the questions as well too. Can be useful to generate jobs maps with assumptions. Yeah. Oh, is that that's a question? Yeah, let's get into questions.
Yeah, let's get into questions. So we've got 4 in the Q&A. Matthias, if you could pop your question into the Q&A, there's a little icon in the bottom toolbar that says Q&A, and we'll get that into line.
I'm actually going to start there, Elaine, just because I already kind of read it and
okay,
it was there.
Yeah. Okay, go for it.
So the question was from Matthias, can it be useful to generate a job map with assumptions? And I not only do I think it is useful, I think you should do it, and I recommend that. In the new course that you just mentioned, the scoping your jobs to be done strategy, I actually talk about that. And if you look at the jobs to be done canvas, right? So my model of jobs to be done has 5 elements: the who, the what, the how. That is the job performer, the main job, and the process. And then there are the outcomes and the circumstances. I turn that into a canvas, which essentially has 5 boxes for each one of those things with a couple of prompts. And the canvas is really there to help you have that initial dialogue around answering the question, where are we going to innovate, by answering those 5 questions. Right in the middle of my jobs to be done canvas is a job map spot, right? But you haven't done any research yet. What you're putting in there are some assumptions around what some known steps in a job map might be, right? Because we never go into this completely blank, right? You never pick a job where you don't know anything about how people get started or what the middle or what the end of the job is. And the idea is to just kind of put things out there and then assess where your biggest gaps in knowledge are, right? Because that's going to help you focus. That's going to help focus your research questions, right? You may have already done a ton of research about how people get started with a job, right? And you might actually have that data already there that you can go back on. Oh, by the way, that's something else you can do. You can go back to existing data and convert it into a job map. It might be harder, right? Because that data probably wasn't collected with a job map in mind, but you can go back to existing qualitative data and bring that into your job map, right? So you might look at the job map, this assumption job map. I call it an assumption job map, Matthias, or a hypothesis job map as well too, and say, oh, we know more about that spot than we know about that spot. When I go out into the field, I want to make sure I fill in my gaps. So by creating that assumption map based on your existing knowledge, first acknowledge that it's based on existing knowledge, right? So don't take that as the thing you're going to start working with necessarily. But that'll help shape your mental model of what you know and what you don't know by doing that exercise.
Matthias had a follow-up question in the Q&A. Do you account for non-functional jobs in your version of this framework, such as emotional jobs and social jobs?
I don't actually too much. No, for me, those are, you want to get those 5 core elements down, right? And you want to get those, and then there are things like emotional jobs, social jobs, which come into play, in my opinion, more towards the solutioning. When you go from understanding the problem space to the solution space, it's more about the how are you going to develop the solution. Well, you have to do it in a way that addresses those emotions, right? But they drive less of what the direction is that you're going to choose. They still can be directional, but they tend to be more about guiding the next step of the solution, as well as the marketing and the go-to-market aspects as well too. Then they become really, really important to know what feelings you're trying to avoid with your solution as well too. So I left those out. I was trying to simplify things, right? Jobs to be done can get complicated with different models out there, and Tony Ulwick's got this 83-step process. It's like, where do I begin? So I just wanted it to be those 5 elements. Let's start there. But that doesn't prevent you from adding it in somewhere. You can add it in if you wanted to. What are some key emotional jobs that people are trying to get done? Yeah, sure.
Do you want to dive into to Paul's question? I can.
Yeah, sure. Was that the first one here?
Yes, it was. Thank you very much, Paul, for submitting in advance.
This long one, yeah.
I have given you talking privileges. If you could unmute, and if you're comfortable, Paul, turn on your camera.
Hello.
Hi there.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't see the camera feature, but
all right. Well, let's just go ahead.
It's not showing me.
That might be an extra button or something, Elaine. I don't know.
No,
I'm on the frame, but I don't see it.
Yeah, I don't see an option here. So, okay, no camera. Sorry about that.
It's all right. Anyway, not to fanboy here, but read the books. And we deploy this. I'm at Thomson Reuters, and we deploy this framework. and we're hoping to deploy it evenly.
Yeah.
But one of the things we face, because we are a technology company, is a lot of the technology we use is not apparent to us when we're using it. It's become such a uh, piece of habit, or there are things that just become so expected that when we make them better, the user just kind of gets where they were going with a step missing, and it's not really noticed, right? So when we want to always speak in a way that we've defined jobs and we're using these, as real modes of communication between all the teams we have to communicate with. How do you feel the jobs to be done applies to things that are less than conscious, right? Like something that's been removed. It's difficult to get someone to extract and share with you their experience of something that was seamless.
Right. Yeah, yeah, I understand. A quick answer is it depends, but I'll go on beyond that as my answer. I could just answer all these with it depends, Elaine. What do you think? Let's do a Q&A with Jim, and I just say it depends every question, right?
Yeah.
Then we'd be done with the webinar. No,
Yeah.
no, it does depend, Paul. I just had this recently as well, too. I was telling Elaine about this morning. I was working with a tech company that had a solution with a lot of automated steps as well, too, in their job map. And we actually created a job map, and they said, do I include those steps because they're invisible? Because the system already does half of them, and I actually advised her to do that, to include them in the job map. So my initial answer is, if it's reasonable to include those things that are automated or invisible or just kind of taken for granted, I would do that, because there might actually be an opportunity to improve on that, or to eliminate it or something, even if it's happening in the background, just like completely eliminate it. So I would advise to, first of all, examine, does it make sense to include those hidden steps in, and just include it in your job mapping exercise, right? But there may be things that are so, over decades and decades and decades just don't exist anymore. The thing that was coming to mind as you were speaking, Paul, was like washing clothes. Right. You used to have like a washboard, and like the difference between the first wash and the rinse and the second wash and the second rinse was really, really well known to somebody doing washing clothes by hand. Right. Because you saw the water and you felt the washboard and stuff like that. And, so I think, over time, washing clothes is all these automated steps. Is there a difference between the wash cycle and the rinse cycle? Yeah, you might want to include things at that point, but you might not want to get as granular as washing clothes by your hands anymore, just because we've kind of moved on, decades since we've kind of moved on from there. I don't know if that's a good example for what you do, Paul, but I hope that helped.
I think it is. I mean, for us, the idea is to make sure that we're always stepping outside of the business and the business rules that have kind of been the historical mode of every corporation, and really making sure that when we jump out into the customer view and the customer first, or the individual first, rather, is
individual for human first, right? Yeah,
the human first is the way we talk. But when we get in there, we want to make sure that we haven't created a task that it's just a waste of time, right? For us.
And now that affects your research as well, too, right? Because when people are talking to you, they're going to skip over those steps, right? So that's why having a kind of a probing research is, like, how did that happen? Wait, can you go back? How did you get from there to there? It's like, oh yeah, all this, magic happens behind the scenes or whatever. It's like, well, tell me about the magic behind the scenes. So you actually want to try to research and poke into those invisible things as well, too.
Yeah, and I found that probing the absence of that magic kind of gets you close, right? Like talking about.
Tell me about that.
The struggles that people have had prior to this change, right? And then they realize, oh yeah, something did change. At one point, I remember we were always messing around with this thing, or we were always tied up on the phone trying to solve that, or we just stopped using X because
exactly.
And now we're using it, and so finding, just really understanding what's the difference between having and not having, I think sometimes for us is a good probe.
Hey, is Jen still on here? I mean, is she still live? I just wanted to ask Jen's opinion about how to research that.
1 second, let me bring Jen up, but then we should move on
Okay, we're
pretty
gonna move
quickly because
on.
I want to make sure we've got about 10 questions in queue with 20
Can you
minutes
call
left.
bullshit on me, Jen, or did I say the right thing?
No, I think that's fair. You were talking about that a bit in your workshop, right, Jim?
Yeah.
Tell me about the last time, or tell me
Yeah.
about the time, and tell me about the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
So I think that's a bit about like what Paul's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So in this instance, no, I don't need to call bullshit.
Okay. All right. Just want to check. Just want to check on that. And that's the thing that I've always found. You like, you have a job, whatever it is, prepare a meal, wash your clothes, right? Wash your clothes. Tell me how you get started. The first thing that comes out of the person's mouth is never how they get started. You almost always, your research question is, you have to go back like many, 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 many steps to actually get to the beginning of what they're talking about. So yeah, people tend to generalize and talk in a lumpy way. They'll focus more on one part and they just kind of skip over a whole mess of stuff, right? And you need to kind of slow that down and then dive in deep on that. Thanks, Jen.
Awesome. All right, Jen, let's move on to Jonathan's question next, and then we'll have Jonathan.
4 boxes over here?
Yes.
Well, is it 1 question or 4? What the heck's going on?
Let's bring Jonathan up on stage.
All right, Jonathan, which question do I answer here?
Let's see. Jonathan, you'll need to unmute if you want to speak. There we go.
There we go. Hi. Hello.
Hey, Jonathan. Good morning. Good afternoon.
How's it going?
Yeah, pretty good.
Good afternoon to you. I did have a few questions here, and we could just take any one of these.
All right. Well, I'll let you pick.
Yeah. So for the first 3, I was assuming that we would have, let's say, between 4 to 6 main jobs that are related, because you speak in that context as far as like scaling and scoping and whatnot.
Yeah.
And I want to understand a little bit more about the switch interviews, the way that you were framing them, let's say, in your toolkit seemed to be around the buyer, and for good reason. That was very clear. But the idea of like working with something that's existing versus not is on my mind, and then how to conduct an interview accordingly. So I'm curious if you have an opinion about certain factors that would, if there's an existing product, doing a standard versus switch approach.
I have found, and I've talked to several other people as well too, that you can kind of mix switch and what I call jobs interviews, which are kind of open interviews. And the difference, I see it as kind of building up forward in what I call a jobs interview. You're trying to start with the job and kind of build that up and break down the process. And then eventually in your development process, you're going to come up with a solution. But a lot of people already have a solution, right? So what switch interviews do is kind of start from that, and you reverse engineer the job from that, right? The buying, so a typical switch interview does start with the buying decision, because you're essentially using that as a critical incident. In the course that we gave in December, Elaine, I talked about the critical incident technique, and Jen just mentioned it there as well too, that to prevent your interview partners from overgeneralizing and just generalizing, what you want to do is you want to ask them about a worst case scenario or a time that they were executing the job and it went really poorly, for instance. And what that does is it gets them talking about something specific. So that critical incident technique and the specificity that comes with it is kind of already baked into the switch interview, because you're saying, why did you buy this product, right? That's your starting point. You want to reverse engineer back to understand the motivation and the job behind the motivation, right? But you're kind of using that buying decision as a critical incident in the job performer's mind. But there are other critical incidents that you can also start with. It doesn't have to be the actual, paying for something or purchasing. It could be when you decided to adopt something or when you switched from one thing to another, right? So if you listen to Bob Mesta, who kind of pioneered and developed the switch interviews, the switch interview does say focus on the buying decision as a critical incident, right? But he talks about finding the energy of the switch, going from the old way to the new way. And there's energy in there. And that energy points to a job to be done, right? And he's like a guru and that kind of thing. But he says, I don't need a purchasing decision. I can use the switch technique to find that change in energy with anything, right? I found it a little bit more difficult to do without that buying or that kind of hard switch that you have in there. But what I've heard a lot of researchers do is start with the current solution that you have and do a switch interview. And then once you find what they're actually trying to do and you've identified what their job is, then you can start moving forward and do things like uncover the job map from there, right? You say, okay, let's forget about my product and the purchase and how much it costs and that kind of thing. Okay, now I think we have the job. Tell me how you execute that job. And then you go forward into a jobs interview.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. You just demystified the whole switchiness by putting it in sort of very natural terms of what's the current state, and then reverse engineer, if you will. So that is helpful. Thank you.
Right. The other thing
I'd be happy to ask
Jonathan,
more questions, but there might be others that have other questions too.
One more comment about switch interviews, Jonathan, too, is that they're often easier for stakeholders to digest, right? Because you got that founder who's in love with his or her product, right? Or the business stakeholder. And it's like, okay, we're going to start by talking about us and you, you, the stakeholder, right? But then we're going to work back towards the customer. It's a little easier for them to swallow that as well, too.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially to the point you were raising, what we were talking about before.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I ask another?
To Jonathan, I don't know. Elaine, it's Elaine's choice.
Yes, if you can answer it in 3 minutes, and then we'll move on
so you're putting pressure on me for your second question, Jonathan. Okay, there you go. Let's see if we can do it.
Dive in there.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. I guess my number 2, desired outcomes.
Yeah.
I assume your answer is going to be it depends. So well,
it depends.
But it would be helpful just to get an idea of in regards to scope. Let's say there were 4 to 6 main related jobs.
Yeah.
The idea of like, what would one expect? What is a range that would be helpful to learn more about?
Yeah, the actual driver there is kind of the scope of your job. If you're talking about a super high level B2B function that's very complex, you're going to have more outcomes than washing your clothes or preparing a meal, right? Which are kind of smaller and more well defined. So it depends on how high or low level you've scoped your job, right? But you'll typically end up with 50 to 100, even more if you do your research well.
Okay, that's really great. That's a lot.
It is a lot.
You're saying 50 to 100 if we had between 4 and 6 main related jobs.
That's like each.
Oh, okay. Okay, thanks.
It's an interesting question though that you didn't ask though, Jonathan. But can I ask? Tell me about
my question.
I'm going to ask Elaine a question. Do outcomes overlap with related jobs? So if we have Jonathan's got his 4 to 6 different jobs that he's scoped out, each with a job map, and then you look at you do the outcomes analysis. Are you going to have outcomes that span all 4 to 6 of those jobs?
Definitely. It just depends. Yeah. There's like I would think there's like a spaghetti map, right?
Yeah.
Which may or may not be an interesting diagram, but it is a helpful way to frame things in our mind.
Agree. Spaghetti map. There you go. There's a nice blog post article. Mm-hmm. Spaghetti map of desired outcome statements.
Yeah.
There you go.
All right.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Let's move over to Joshua's question in the Q&A. Josh, do you want to come on stage and ask that?
Is that written somewhere or?
Yes, it's in the Q&A. If you
it's in the Q&A. Okay, great.
And Josh is also allowed to talk if you'd like to.
All right. Hey, how's it going?
Hi.
Hello,
Good.
Josh.
Good. Thanks.
So I'm a growth consultant for B2B SaaS companies. All about jobs to be done, and have done quite a bit of the work of scoping and validating those assumptions. And I have a client who's particularly sticky for me right now that maybe you could help throw me a lifeline for. There's every time I've done a scope, there's always been a moment of, oh yes, okay, yeah, now I understand this. We've been hammering away at this for 3 or 4 hours now over the course of the last month. And they have a great solution, but it's been hard. And I don't want to tell them what their job is, right?
Right.
My job is to facilitate them to discover it. But we haven't discovered it. And so maybe we could talk a little bit about this, but essentially what their product does is it helps small business owners and marketing and sales managers create and manage email signatures so that outgoing messages are consistent with their brand. The initial